Energy Transition, episode number 78. Our topic today is BRICS, new members. Good morning to our audience. Good morning, Irina, Tammy, David.
Good morning.
Hi. Hello.
Please let me share some data about our topic of today. The first one is six new countries were added to BRICS. They are in green in this map. From January 2024, they will start being, so we will be 11 in the total
Yeah.
in this month. It's interesting because they isolate Western Europe and North America, the black line. But at the same time, they are planning to have, with this six more in the red line, let's say, covering more countries. And it's very strange, this position. And let me say some numbers about this. 29% of world GDP, 46% of the population, 43% of oil production, 25% of export of goods, and they will surpass G7.
Yeah.
With only G7 with the GDP. The numbers are, but let me show something very curious.
May withdraw prior to its membership officially going into effect. Here's what happened. The country's two leading presidential candidates, Javier Milei and Patricia Bullrich, announced their strong opposition to Argentina's entry into BRICS. They even went as far as to say that if elected, they would immediately withdraw an already accepted application to join.
Yeah, crazy. David, how will G7 be reacting? More sanctions, bans?
Well, I don't think I wouldn't expect a big any kind of overt reaction from the G7. I mean, certainly the G7 countries have this vast array of sanctions already in place with Russia, to a much lesser extent with China. They have a lot of sanctions in place related to Iran as well, obviously. And, those sanction regimes could increase at any time. The U.S. has been especially guilty, I think, in using currency as a weapon of war over the past couple of years. And that is probably leading to a lot of the reshuffling in geopolitical equations here, which these additions to BRICS really represent. I think this is probably, and I'm just amazed at the lack of media coverage about this so far. This is probably the most earth-shaking geopolitical event of this century. The BRICS had already, at the end of last year, by some reports, by some estimates, already surpassed the G7 in total GDP. And obviously the addition of Saudi Arabia in particular, which with its $1 trillion plus economy, is going to increase that lead over the G7 in terms of total GDP. But the big news to me is, this gives the BRICS alliance two of the three largest oil producers and exporters on earth in their membership, 43% of total global oil production. And regardless of what Antonio Guterres and Al Gore and John Kerry continue to claim, the world's economy is still a petroleum-based economy, and control of oil is still the most important strategic resource on the face of the earth until otherwise decided. And so it's a big deal. I'm amazed. I wasn't expecting them to add that many additional applicants. I was expecting Saudi Arabia to join for sure, and the UAE as well. But the others, and I don't really understand the reasoning behind adding Ethiopia and Egypt in particular, but that's their part of it as well. So it's a pretty major deal.
Tell me, Irina.
I agree with everything David said. As for the media coverage, David, we've all noticed that corporate media nowadays operate based on the assumption if we don't report it, it didn't happen, or it was insignificant.
Good point.
Apparently, that's the same motivation for not, reporting widely. They did mention it, and some
It gets a
analysts,
mention. Yeah.
yeah, and they've even quoted some analysts as saying that this is the new OPEC, a bigger OPEC. Makes sense to make that connection.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But it's
not
a lot
of
more than that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot more than that. It's international trade in currencies other than the dollar.
Well, I
Irina,
think one of the interesting things was how much influence the G20 has been receiving recently in conjunction with the G7. So quite a lot of international arrangements and whatnot say G7, G20, and 6 of the BRIC countries are in the G20, from what I understand. Perhaps now with the new ones, maybe more. So it's this counterbalance to that sort of G7, G20 geopolitical arrangement. And I went through Vladimir Putin's speech. So what's interesting is Russia takes over the leadership of the BRICS next year, which means that the big meetings or whatever will take place in Russia. And one of the things he emphasized more than once in his speech was de-dollarization and promoting other intercurrency transfers purchases. What that will look like is, left to speculation at this point. Will it be based on the yuan? Because he was basically saying every country should be allowed to use their own currency in transactions and not be wedded to the dollar. So I wonder if maybe one of the reasons why there hasn't been much coverage of it is that this would maybe do a run on the dollar. Maybe people would start dumping it and whatnot at a time when, the US loses some of its financial rating, that could cause a crash or whatever. I don't know. I'm just speculating on why they wouldn't want to cover this, but it also makes the G7 and G20 alignment look bad. Makes them look bad. Like, why doesn't everyone want to stay with us?
I
And
don't
for obvious
They've
reasons
been
that
so
David
stupid
talked
for
about.
so long, probably.
I
Yeah.
don't believe in a strong replacement of dollar in these negotiations. I don't believe on that.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that's been somewhat overblown, although, there's no
You
question
never know.
that, right. I mean, and
Yeah.
there's no question that there have been transactions this year, agreements to transact oil, natural gas, and other commodities in other currencies outside the dollar. And
Yeah.
but the other side of that is that the currencies of most of these BRICS countries remain tied to the dollar in
In one
terms of
way
the
or
value of
another,
the
yeah.
currency. And
Yeah.
decoupling from the dollar would be a very risky enterprise for these countries to try to do. And notwithstanding any sanctions that might come from the United States in response, which I think would be very poorly received by our population here if a president tried to do that. But I just think that this using tying these international trade, and it's not just oil trade, but trade in all commodities to the U.S. dollar, has been an institution now for over a century, and trying to decouple from that can create a lot of unintended consequences for countries that try to do it. And I'm not sure too many are willing to fully take on that risk right now.
Irina, how the oil market can be affected with this 43% of oil production? What do you see in this market?
Well, it will probably be a kind of an OPEC plus, but only in very, very general terms, because Brazil, I think, has indicated more than once that it does not necessarily want to follow OPEC or OPEC plus policies on oil. But now, if this expansion means, and it is supposed to mean closer cooperation between the members, maybe maybe there will be a broader concerted effort to control oil prices, and that's bad news for importers. On the other hand, China and India, two of the original BRICS members, are the biggest importers,
Right.
besides the United States. So it will be a fine balance to strike with regard to exporters' interests and importers' interests. One way to strike that balance, I guess, will be, we won't try to keep prices too high, but let's settle in other currencies than the dollar. Because David is perfectly right. You can't just dismantle an international payment system based on the US currency overnight, or even over a year, or even over a decade. But you could use your local currencies for individual transaction settlements. Nobody can stop you.
Right.
Even if their values on international forex markets are essentially tied to the dollar or the euro, you can, execute these transactions in local currencies rather than dollars, which means less US currency used for actual transactions, whatever happens on, the broader international currency markets.
I like your point about the being at the consumer aspect of that, because it's like China and India, which wanted to ensure that they would have access to that market by anchoring it to some extent in this relationship. Because if the West is serious about stopping the use of oil and gas, in the next 20 years, they know that reduces the investment possibilities. Maybe the Middle Eastern countries don't want to have to listen to those consumers and would prefer to make their arrangements separately with this other trade group. And it's a way of sort of anchoring that consumer producer relationship in a structure outside of the sort of, I don't want to use the word, but I have no other word for it, but the sort of bully politics of the West right now. So it allows that different relationship to develop and ensure the prosperity and continuance of Middle East oil production outside the West.
It also, I think Dan Yergin would probably say, and of course I haven't seen him weigh in on this yet, but I think he'd probably say that this admission of Saudi Arabia and the UAE into that alliance only enhances and reinforces the bifurcation of oil trading markets now globally.
Absolutely.
And it also, I think, just from my own perspective, represents a real failure in diplomacy by the Biden administration, which has really weighed in pretty heavily with Saudi Arabia trying to prevent this move this year.
Biden and European too.
And Europe as well. Yes, that's right. And, it just shows the decreasing influence of these Western countries. Sure. And I believe a lot of that decreasing influence is their effort right now related to climate change to move away from a petroleum-based economy, because the rest of the world is not coming with them. And so I think that really motivates a lot of this banding together by these other countries. And the illustration you showed at the top, Armando, that shows the division, how BRICS is excluding Europe and the United States. Well, that's also emblematic of the United States, Canada, and Europe excluding Africa and Asia and South America, right? Over the years.
Or try to push them into this other direction that they don't necessarily want to do, and using those trade arrangements and the financial system to try and force it. And they're saying, well, I think we need to find an alternative here if that's how you're going to be. And this is the alternative.
But let's be fair. Is BRICS actually excluding Europe and the US? Has any country from Europe tried to apply? They wouldn't.
Well, no. Yes, that's true. Yes.
It's not a deliberate exclusion.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
We have a LinkedIn user. I don't know who is who.
How does? This has got to be Stu Turley. Well, you could call it BroPac, I guess.
I love it.
The bros. Yeah, I love that too.
Oh, wait.
BroPac.
OPEC surname affect BRICS application or acceptance? I don't know the answer to that.
I don't understand the question.
I think maybe they mean like if you're an OPEC country does that give you sort of special access or better consideration in joining than if you're not
Probably,
an OPEC country?
probably. I mean,
But the
all three OPEC countries got in.
Right.
but then
Yeah.
there's
That's right.
Argentina and Ethiopia who aren't part of OPEC, so
Yeah.
hard to say. Hard to say.
I
Yes,
don't know.
thank you, Toro.
Well,
Great.
Toro, thank you very much. We like those one-word comments.
Great. The same LinkedIn user, I'm not sure that's the same, but
I'd imagine this would only add more volatility on international commodity exchange. Doesn't bode well for the northern hemisphere going into winter. Oh, that's some I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
have
what
any
doesn't bode well
insight.
for the northern hemisphere is the potential strikes in Australian LNG.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, we got.
But we'll see how
You
that
got,
goes.
David. You got. Thank you. But Temi, please, BRICS is similar to NATO without bombs.
No, I think they're more of a trade alliance than a military
Yeah.
alliance, and so I would, make it a better similarity towards G7, G20 than a NATO. Sometimes there's defense arrangements arrive afterwards, but from what I read, there was really nothing about defense in this. It was all about trade, having those linkages, maybe finding a new banking system that can compete with the SWIFT system, which I think China and Russia were doing anyway, developing that. But to bring that in, and one analysis that I was reading, and I sort of agree with, if you join the BRICS Bank, is that a fast track to membership? I think that perhaps is a better tag than being an OPEC member, although I'm sure being an OPEC member helps. But I think maybe if you're already participating in the bank, it just makes it that much easier to join the trading network, especially maybe if you have something useful to trade.
Yeah.
And
More
I
a
haven't done an
financial.
analysis yet of what does Ethiopia bring to the table? Is
It's
it
more a
certain
financial
minerals they?
system. It's more a
Yeah,
financial.
yeah,
Maybe it's geographical location. I think
yeah. That's
it's
what I was thinking. Access to the
Red
Gulf
Sea,
there.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
But BRICS are more
Like Egypt.
concentrated. Yeah,
yeah.
BRICS is more concentrated on commodities than technologies, for instance. Is something is an advantage or is a weakness for them?
Well, I mean, one of the things Putin was saying was that they want to increase technological innovation and exchange in tech. Now, is that coming from Russia and China to the other countries? That's interesting. I don't see China necessarily sharing technology, but you never know.
Temi. Oh, congratulations, Temi. You interpreted
Okay.
Tammy
right.
got it.
Great. A few months ago, David, Brazil was totally in favor of the US. Now, Brazil is a friend of Russia and China.
Yeah.
So, how do you
Well,
see the position of Brazil in this game?
well, I mean, don't you think that you have more insight than I do? But I would think that probably, has a lot to do with the fact that, a socialist president has been reinstated in Brazil. And when you look back over history, the United States, I mean, this is a two-way street, right? The United
Yeah.
States foreign policy has always responded aggressively in opposition to any socialist regime that comes into power in Central and South America. And particularly during the 50s and 60s, when the CIA was aggressively fomenting insurrections and coup d'etats across the world in Central, South America, and Africa, we got a well-deserved reputation for being a hostile country to any socialist regime. But by the same token, socialist regimes tend to migrate into the Russian and now China's orbit globally. And so I guess this isn't surprising. I certainly don't blame Brazil for that. And, I just think it's kind of a natural outgrowth of how these dynamics have developed over the last half century.
Good. We have a question on. Sorry. Who
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that. Thoughts on Nigeria not being admitted to BRICS. I think that has to be a little surprising, given Nigeria's oil wealth. But it's
Yeah,
such an unstable country in terms
Maybe
of
next time.
governance. Yeah,
yeah,
it's very
great.
resource rich. There's no question about it, and it seemed like a natural addition to the BRICS alliance. But it could just be that the political situation is always so unstable there.
Ethiopia is not exactly an
Yeah,
example of
that too.
stability,
Yeah,
but I
or
guess
Argentina right now. Yeah,
or Argentina for
yeah,
a very
Very
long while.
stable. Yeah.
Maybe they're pacing themselves. Maybe they
maybe
can't
so.
just apply, admit everyone who applied,
Yeah.
but they're making plans.
Yeah, good. Peter Lafontaine,
National
national.
Review reports China is out of the Paris Accord. Is that true? And if so, why do you think mainstream media is not? I never realized China was in the Paris Accord.
Well,
Uh-huh.
it's kind of one of these annex members,
Oh, that's
and
right. Yes.
you know, they had made their statement about what they would do by 2060. And I mean, this story is back from July 25th, and a couple of National Review reported it, Hot Air reported it. And I think it has more to do with their statement that their national security will take precedence
Oh, yeah.
over
Yeah.
the
Tammy,
emissions.
your image
So,
is off for me, Tammy, please.
Yeah, we've lost your video for some reason, Tammy.
But we can hear you.
Oh yeah,
all right.
yeah.
There you are.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah,
I don't know. My iPad being weird.
Technology.
yeah, technology.
We could use some more cooperation on that.
Uh,
But can I make a comment about what
Sure.
you asked about Brazil, Armando, and
sure,
as
sure.
David said, I'm sure you know more than me. And I'm
You're
wondering,
doing that.
you know, like the Biden administration didn't like Bolsonaro, and I believe they supported Lula getting in
Yeah.
because maybe they thought he'd be more amenable to the sort of direction that the Biden administration was going. And so I'm not so sure whatever statements he makes, I don't think that's necessarily in contradiction to what the Biden administration would approve of. I don't know. I almost feel like he's a spy there or something for America. I don't know. 'Cause how
Every
did he
every
get in?
every 4 years we change the governments here
Yeah.
from
That's the healthy
right
way.
side to left side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the healthy way. And maybe Brazil and maybe other countries are beyond the if you're not with me or against me way of thinking.
Yeah.
There are more complex
Yeah.
ways of thinking, of viewing the world, and building your policies around.
Yeah. One would hope.
Maybe there's that.
Irina, who will lead BRICS? China or Russia?
I was asking myself that. I don't think for now there is a clear leader, although China is the most powerful, the biggest economy, I think. Although not in money terms, because Saudi Arabia is the biggest in those terms. I think they're being very careful. The leaders of the BRICS so far, they've been very careful about not having one clear leader. And again,
Yeah.
this refers to this: if you're not with me or against me. A related perspective on the world of there must be one big leader, one hegemon. What's the correct pronunciation of this word?
Hegemon, yes.
Hegemon. Oh, great.
You got it.
You got it.
Yay. And there can't be a group of countries that work in concert. And yet we've seen with OPEC that there can be a group of countries that can work in concert without, even though OPEC does have a clear leader, and that's Saudi Arabia. But now OPEC Plus has two leaders, that's the Saudis and the Russians, and it's still working. So maybe, just maybe, there are other ways to group. Maybe after a while, as the BRICS grows, a leader will emerge. It will probably be China. Most likely it will be China.
Yeah.
But I don't know. At this point, I think they're being very, very careful about it.
Yeah.
Not to have such an
Very
obvious,
sensible
clear
point, yes.
leader. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we have two questions here. Please let me put the first. LinkedIn user we cannot.
Yeah. exodus of oil mega majors from Nigeria about 3 months ago. Yeah, Shell and I guess Chevron getting out of that country, and again, it's due largely to the political instability there. There's constant conflict going on between the rebels and the regime, and it's hard to maintain a healthy business environment when we've seen the similar dynamic in Algeria over the last couple of decades, where it's this country that's incredibly rich in resources, but the regime is always so unstable there that it's hard to really mount successful oil and gas ventures, although some companies have succeeded.
And I think there's the question of their carbon footprint. The super majors are very careful about their carbon footprint right now. And the footprint in Nigeria is bigger than in other places. So there's that.
And wasn't there litigation going on with the operations in Nigeria? And so maybe they just decided, cut our losses and go.
Yeah.
Oh, electric vehicles.
Oh, I can't wait till I get my electric vehicle, so I'll never have to buy oil again.
Except for all the oil that goes into making those vehicles.
Yeah.
I think the next comment is a good one. Yeah.
Thinking the West has a huge influence in Nigeria and BRICS are being careful on admitting a country without 100% allegiance to the BRICS agenda. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, 100% is a bit too much because Saudi Arabia has very strong ties with the West as well. It doesn't have 100% allegiance, but it's trying to be more independent in its policies, as is India, for example, or Brazil or Argentina. But that's one factor for sure.
The difference among countries in NATO, the same difference that we have in BRICS. I mean, so deep. No.
Sorry.
Thank you. You helped me a lot. Just answer my question. Perfect.
Explain.
I don't know. What do you mean?
Well, isn't it really obvious? I mean, NATO is an anti-Russian alliance, has been since its inception. I mean, it has a clear enemy. It has a clear purpose. While, the BRICS, first of all, it's not a military alliance. I don't think we can stress this enough. It's a trade alliance. Not yet. Probably not for a very long time. And they have much more versatile, enemies, so to speak. Because as one of you pointed out, each BRICS member has different geopolitical interests.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very different grouping, even from G7.
Yeah.
Are they dubious?
Well, I don't know about dubious.
Because several different interests and no conflict.
Yeah, they'll have to balance. This is what makes BRICS very interesting. They'll have to balance their interests in such a way as to not, encroach on a fellow member's interests.
That's right.
It's really interesting what's going to happen.
So I'm curious to see what will happen with Iran and Saudi Arabia in that case.
Yeah. I thought it was probably the most significant element of this new batch of members. Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Iran are again in one group, and that's a trade group. It's really fascinating.
It is.
Yeah.
The various instabilities with the BRICS and allies, currencies, Russia, China, Argentina. How will BRICS overcome the relative stability of the U.S. dollar? Well, I don't know that BRICS has any intention of doing that, honestly. There's a real disagreement among economists over what the goals of the BRICS alliance are related to the U.S. dollar and the stability of the dollar, which, by the way, for over a century has promoted stability of currencies globally. So, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, not to be a U.S. booster, because I'm highly critical of the United States on this podcast pretty consistently, but the one aspect of pegging things to the U.S. dollar, international trade to U.S. dollar, has been to promote relative stability in currencies globally that tie themselves to the dollar. And when you look at the BRICS alliance countries in particular, those countries that have their currencies pegged to the U.S. dollar, like Brazil, have prospered more than the countries that don't, like South Africa. And so I think, there's just a lot of reasons why trying to do away with the U.S. dollar for international as the benchmark for international trades is just fraught with a lot of difficulties and economic peril. And that process, while I think a legitimate concern for many, is still going to be an awful lot. It proceed a lot more slowly and cautiously than some folks think.
Yeah, probably.
Probably.
So,
Like, I'm curious though about what this will mean for, like, the IMF, for example, has been talking about for some years now that they need a new Bretton Woods, that they need a new type of global arrangement that will be off the US dollar to some extent. And so if you have the IMF talking about that for some time, what does that indicate for the BRICS? I agree with David that if it does happen, it'll be slow. It might be slow until it isn't.
Right, exactly.
As these things go, right? Until there's a run or whatever. But I mean, it's in the future, and it's so difficult. We can speculate and listen to all these different analysts, and I've heard competing viewpoints on that issue, and all we can do is make an educated guess.
Yeah.
But what role does global coin play? What role does some kind of global digital currency? I don't know. Maybe that's what they're angling for. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I enjoy your diverse insight on these live webcasts. Do you mind sharing how all of you cross paths and caused you to pool your resources for such an informative broadcast? Well, thank you, first of all.
Yeah, thank you.
That's the whole point of this, right? Is to have diverse insight on these issues related to the energy transition. I think we all basically linked up over LinkedIn, right?
Armando was the one who brought us all together.
Yeah, Armando brought us
Armando's
together
the best.
through LinkedIn.
He's the catalyst for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, I'm glad, really, really always grateful to be a part of this because I learned so much from the diverse viewpoints of these other three folks. And every Monday morning is a learning experience for me.
For me too. Excellent. Speaking of OPEC, Mike Hobart.
How does the panel feel about the claims by Gehring and Rosenzweig earlier this year around non-OPEC producers have peaked in production? Has OPEC potentially hit their peak production as well? There's a lot of disagreement on this. I don't think the U.S. has hit peak production. At least
Canada
not
hasn't either.
And Canada certainly hasn't. And whether the OPEC countries have is kind of hard to determine. I mean, there's even varying opinions over how much excess capacity Saudi Arabia has at this point. So it's kind of an open question, I think.
Irina, what's your sense of that?
I was thinking Gehring and Rosenzweig are often contrarian. They specialize in resources, and 2 years ago, I think they were warning that U.S. natural gas production is going to plateau soon and then start declining. We still haven't seen that, I think, but you never know.
I think that's completely wrong.
But yeah, I have really no idea. But about OPEC, well, first of all, there are many non-OPEC producers, including emerging ones like Guyana and Namibia. The latest I wrote for oil price was about Namibia emerging as the next Guyana, basically.
Yeah.
So we don't know which non-OPEC producers they mean, but as you said, David, the picture is no clearer in OPEC itself. I mean, Saudi Arabia is now investing billions in boosting its production capacity. But Nigeria, for example, is finding it hard to even maintain a consistent level of production, even though its resources are not depleted. There are other challenges. Same in Angola.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. It's really complicated picture. And the only thing I can think of to say on this topic is we have to wait and see. You never know.
I think this topic
unless of course, sorry, David, U.S. producers are forced into, peak production.
Exactly.
Yeah.
they can.
and the super majors as a whole,
Super.
which
This would
is
make a
not
great
relevant to OPEC.
topic for our next episode, actually.
I think so.
Do
We
the
can
whole
have fun with
episode.
that one.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a lot to
Peak
say.
production.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
good.
Great idea.
So the conclusion could be that BRICS are concentrated on commodities, export commodities, I suppose, currency, financial systems, petro BRICS, let's see, and what else?
Let's see.
BRICS is not a military alliance, at least not
BRICS
yet.
is not military.
Not military.
Why?
Well, wait. BROPEC.
I love BROPEC.
BROPEC.
BROPEC,
I like
for
that.
sure.
Yeah.
Peter,
Tammy,
for
you
you.
just did a podcast on IFRS, ISSB, and ESG reporting standards. How will
Lots of
BRICS
acronyms.
participate?
Ooh, that's a good question. Maybe that's one of the reasons why Nigeria wasn't included, because they've signed on. They said they're going to bring it in starting next year. So, yeah, but I know China's involved with it, and so, but I think China can manipulate its own stats, and they track a lot of their stuff anyway. The other countries, I'm not so sure, but that's a good question. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
Thank you, Pete. That's awesome.
Fantastic input, guys. I'll
Thanks
make
for your
sure to
comments.
Thank you, Mike. You
great
contributed
idea.
a lot here. Really appreciate it. We had some technical difficulties this morning.
Yeah.
Made us a little late
Fine.
getting started, but
Yeah.
we'll be on time next week. I guarantee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry.
Good people. Thank you so much. Was
Thanks.
very
Thank
Great chat.
you.
Thank you. Y'all
Thanks,
have a great week.
everybody.
Thank
Have
you,
a
sir.
great
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.